Hello, welcome to another CleaveTech tech tip. And in this tech tip, we're going to be concentrating our efforts on this motor. This is the motor out of the Slot Stox car that I've been rebuilding. And if you haven't seen the rest of the series, I'll put a link up on the screen just up here to the playlist for my Slot Stox repairing videos. But as you can see from this video, it's not just all about Slot Stox, it's about rebuilding, repairing a car, repairing a motor, rebuilding motors that can be applied to any sort of slot car. This one just happens to be a Slot Stox car like this. So let's get on with the rebuild of this motor. Well, while this motor is sitting here in front of me, here, I'm going to show you something else that's rather dodgy on it, which I don't quite know what's causing it until I take it apart. But have a look at this pinion. Look at you can obviously see that the whole thing is totally worn out and the bushing is totally worn out, and I'll show you a close-up of that in a minute. But also, if I turn the armature around, look at how the pinion sits. Look, see now it's angled more this way. And then when I turn it around like that, now the pinion's angled up this way. So I don't know quite whether it's the pinion not on the shaft properly or whether the shaft is bent. If the shaft is bent or totally worn out, then really it's probably a scrap the armature job and put a new armature in. If it's just the pinion is not sitting right on the shaft, then obviously I can maybe put a new pinion on. I can maybe carefully center the pinion, but I might be able to fix that. But say if the shaft's bent or totally worn out, then there's not much I can do and it's probably time for a new armature. So taking a close-up look, we can see that actually the bushing in the end of the motor is not even soldered in. It seems to have come out and it's totally worn out as well. We can see that this pinion is sitting on the shaft here, but I say I'm not too sure. It looks maybe as though it's not sitting on the shaft properly. Maybe the pinion's been drilled out or something like that and it's not straight. So I need to fix that. But I'm going to pull the motor apart and then we can have a look at what's inside. So this is a Palmer Super 16D motor. The 16D refers to the type of can and the size of can that the motor has on it, and that sort of gives it away as to what type of motor it is. The Super 16D again is a certain wind of armature that Palmer put inside these motors. I think it's quite an old motor. If you know exactly what model of Palmer 16D this is, and I'm sure there's some viewers out there who do, stick a note in the comments down below so that future people know exactly what model of 16D this is. I will be doing a tech tip on different armature types and different winds of armature, etc. So that's why I haven't gone into it in too much detail in this tech tip. Now, when rebuilding the motor, first thing I need to do is to remove this pinion off of the end. Now, I'm assuming this pinion is soldered on and not just a tight push fit, so I might be able to get it off by heating it and sliding it off with a knife. So I've heated my soldering iron up, so it's ready to go. Now I'm running this soldering iron quite hot, around about 420 degrees, giving it time to heat soak into the tip, so I can put my knife behind the pinion, heat it up, and then hopefully it will just push off like that. Now, what you don't want to do, and I've seen some people doing, is taking their soldering iron and using their soldering iron to lever off the pinion itself, and then you're going to damage all your soldering iron. You're going to break it all when it comes into here. You're going to maybe bend the tip, bend the element, snap the element off. So you don't want to use your soldering iron as a leverage device. Either a thin knife blade like this if you've got to get behind it, or maybe you could use a screwdriver tip or something to lever it off as best you can. But sometimes they're really tight and they're really stuck on. If they're so tight that you can't lever it off, then probably your best thing is to carefully cut the pinion off or grind the pinion off of the shaft until eventually it comes off. Maybe if it's a push fit pinion, you can use a pinion puller, something like this. I know a lot of the hard body racers would use pinion pullers like this because they use a lot of pinions that are push fit onto shafts. So now the pinion's off, I need to get rid of all the solder off of this shaft before the shaft will come out of the bushing at the end, because I need to be able to get that bushing off of that shaft. We know it's totally shot and worn out, but I still need to get it off. So I'm going to power the motor up, take my knife blade and I'm going to use my knife just to cut the solder off the end as the shaft is spinning. The knife blade will actually take the solder off without damaging the shaft and clean the shaft up. You don't want to take a bit of wet and dry paper to it because you'll end up sanding the shaft away and making the shaft too small. But the knife blade doesn't actually wear the shaft down. It just literally cuts the solder away off of the shaft. So we can see now that I've taken the pinion off, the state of the shaft on this motor. Look at it, it's got a great big groove around the shaft. That's probably why the pinion wasn't sitting on very well. It was down in this groove and all the end of the shaft is all mangled. So I'm not too sure whether I'm going to be able to use this armature again. We'll have to see. I'll take it out and I will check to see how straight the shaft is and see if there's anything I can do. I do know a guy who can actually repair shafts by laser welding or a certain type of welding anyway. He can build up the material back on the shafts and then it can be turned down to 2 mil again. But that's probably a little bit excessive for an old armature like this. The other thing to look at when I take it apart is how big is the com on it and whether the com is actually big enough to warrant repairing the armature for future use. So let's unhook the brush springs. Unhook the brush springs. Hopefully the brushes will fall out, which they sort of do. Yep, so they're quite loose in the brush holders here. Will that one come out? Yes, it will. A little pair of tweezers like this is sometimes quite useful to hold things and remove things. Now, brushes tell a tale as well when you remove them. And I'll bring them closer to the screen so you can see. Let's look at these two brushes here. You can see one of them, the one on the bottom here, actually looks like it's nice and curved and fairly equally curved. The one on top has clearly worn more on one side than the other and the curve is not in the middle of the brush. Now that means that probably the brush is not aligned with the commutator very well on that side of the motor. It could also mean that the brush hoods that were holding the brushes in place are not properly aligned and the brush is moving around too much, maybe if the brush hood is a little bit big for the brush. So there's a number of reasons why that brush probably hasn't worn nice and evenly. So I'll be looking at that when I rebuild the motor too. Next stage, let's unscrew the end bell off of the motor. Now when you pull the end bell off, loads of muck and dirt might fall out of your end bell, depending on how long you've had that on. There'll be washers. Now, if you know that this motor was built properly and you were going to redo it again, rather quickly, put it back together again rather quickly, then I'd be tempted to take all the washers off and make a note of which end of the armature shaft the washers came from. Were they from this end bell end or were they from the can end? And then you can make sure you put them all back in the same place and then the spacing of the motor would still be correct. But this motor wasn't spaced very well in the first place. So I'm not too bothered about mixing up the spacers anymore because I'm going to respace it all nicely when I put it back together again. Rebuilding motors is quite messy work. You can see my fingers are already quite black from doing this motor. They're probably going to get worse as it go along, so I'm going to try and keep my fingers fairly clean so I don't make all my tools dirty and black and horrible as I'm using them. But you can see the bushing just totally fell out of the can. It didn't take much to get that out. As I say, it was loose already. So this end bell is quite messy and mucky inside. One thing I did do is I did check this end bell bushing before I took the motor apart, just to see if there was any play in it. And there was hardly any play in it at all. So I'm going to probably leave this end bell bushing in place in the end bell. But obviously it's going to need a new cam bearing. Now, so I don't lose all the little parts, I've got a little box like this. So I'm just going to, for now, put all the screws, all the little parts, all the washers, everything in this little box here, so I don't lose any of it. So I don't knock it all over the bench or onto the floor. Put it all inside there. I even put the old bushing in there for now. The springs, sometimes the springs come off, but these springs are retained on this version of 16D motor here by those spring posts and the screws on top, so they're not going to fall off. Otherwise I would probably remove the springs as well and put them in the little box here. Now you might have seen when I was taking the motor apart that this armature has sort of like a brass washer here, or a brass collar here, that seems to be really tight on the shaft. I can't get it off at all. I'm not too sure. I've not seen one like that before on a 16D. I know sometimes they have brass collars on this end of the armature shaft, but I've never seen one on this end. So hopefully there is some sort of insulation between this brass collar and the commutator, because otherwise the copper ends of the commutator could be shorting out on this brass ring. Obviously I can check that, but I can't get that brass ring off. I don't want to lever it too hard because I don't want to damage the commutator. But you can see that there is quite a sign of wear on that commutator. But the windings themselves all look okay. You know, they're wrapped here at the end. There's a bit of twine round there holding those windings in so they don't come apart when the armature spins really fast. They don't seem broken, they don't seem loose here on the stack. They look okay. You can see this armature has been balanced maybe in the past. Maybe this is factory balancing, I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else has balanced it. I would say it's probably factory balanced because it's only balanced on one pole. Whereas if you're going to spend a little more time and effort, you'd probably find it would need balancing on one end or the other on most of the poles. So I'm just going to clean the armature up with a little bit of lighter fluid just on the armature, just on my rag. Put a little bit like that, and then just give it a wipe, just to wipe any large parts of grease and oil and carbon dust from the brushes. Just wipe most of that off. Being careful, I don't want to rub too hard with anything because I don't want to damage any windings or move any windings. Just want to wipe off the worst of all the muck and crud all around the armature here, just to get the worst of it off like that. Then when I've got the worst of the muck off with the rag and lighter fluid, I'm going to use a little blob of blue tack like this. Now this is my motor blue tack. You can see it's got quite dirty now, but it still works. I think most people in Europe and UK know what blue tack is, but those American friends that maybe not have come across blue tack before, I have used it in other videos. It's one of my favourite slot car tools actually, a blob of blue tack. I've always got that with me. I'm put a link in the description down below of where you can get blue tack from Amazon, and you can have a look at the picture and see what it looks like. It's the sort of stuff that you used to use to stick posters on the wall, probably a bedroom wall as a kid. It sticks to walls and hopefully doesn't damage the walls very much. You can reuse it again and again and again. But it's really useful stuff for cleaning in slot cars because it's nice and soft and it doesn't really damage anything. But you can see you can push it up against the armature and you can get a lot of muck and dirt off of that armature because any dirt and mess just sticks to the blue tack and comes off of the windings, and it can make quite a nice job of getting the worst of the dirt off right inside the windings. You can do quite a nice job. So I'm going to carry on with my blue tack all over the armature, cleaning it all up, and I'll be back in a moment.
12 seconds later.
I'm also going to use the same method to clean up the magnets in the can and the end bell here. So I'm going to use a little bit of lighter fluid first to get the worst of the mess and muck and dirt off. Soak that in that, like so, and then wipe the worst of it off. Then I can use blue tack to clean it up, to finish it off. So again, I'll carry on cleaning up these two parts and I'll be back in a moment.
A few moments later.
Now whilst I was cleaning, which I haven't finished cleaning yet, I'm thinking, well, because I've got to realign these brush hoods anyway and the brush gear on the motor, I might as well unscrew it all anyway, and then it makes the cleaning job much nicer and I don't run the risk of bending these springs any more than they're already bent. So I'm going to unscrew all of this brush gear off of the motor and clean it up a little bit better. So I've cleaned up all the main parts. I've cleaned up the end bell, the armature and the can with magnets. Now there was one thing I noticed when I was cleaning up the can that is not great. You can see that the magnets in the can actually move like this. They're not glued in place. They do have a little clip inside, you can see, that holds them against the outside of the can. It stops the magnets from coming inwards against the armature, but that clip doesn't stop them from moving lengthways. These little indents in the can here, or these little bends in the can here, stop the magnets from coming too far forward. They do reach the stop there and there, but when the armature's in place, that means that the armature would be far too far forwards. If the armature was centered in the magnetic field, the armature would be far too far forwards, and the brushes wouldn't run on the commutator of the armature. So actually, I worked it out when I assembled it all together just loosely, in that when the end bell sits on the car, and it's going to go that way round like that, so when the end bell sits there, the parts of the end bell here push the magnets down into the can, and that's where the magnets need to sit. They need to sit against the inside of the end bell. Unfortunately, that's not in line with these, so that if you had a big smash in your car, the magnets could move forwards. That could try and pull the armature forwards, and even if the armature's spaced so it can't move, it then does put a lot of extra friction on this bushing here, and the armature's not in the centre of the magnetic field, so it won't be running the most efficiently. It would still run probably, but not so great. So I do need to secure the magnets in place when I assemble it, and that's just another job that I've got to do. So with all of those wonderful jobs ahead of me, that's where we're going to leave it for today. So as you can see from this strip down, there's plenty more motor jobs coming in the next few episodes of Tech Tips. If you've liked what you've seen so far, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video. There's a little thumbs up signal below the video, so click on that to show that you liked it. That will tell YouTube you liked it, and then YouTube will push it out to more people like you so they can see my videos. Also, if you haven't done so already, please make a comment if you know what type of motor this actually is, or what particular model of Palmer Super 16D this is. I'd really appreciate that as well. You could even share this video with your friends on social media platforms, etc. There's a little share arrow down below as well. Please use that. And again, if you haven't subscribed, hit the big C, which is just about up here, and then you'll see other videos appearing on the screen. Have a look at those as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.